What's happening? I don't know what's happening. We're losing control of the aircraft here. We lost all control of the aircraft.
Air France crash in 2009. 228 people were killed, and 13 years on, their loved ones' anger is still raw.
The skies above the Atlantic hold a chilling mystery. The vanishing of Flight 447, a marvel of modern aviation, swallowed whole by the night with 228 souls on board. The world stands still, gripped by horror and heartbreak, as the unsinkable plane meets a silent devastation. Loved ones are left in torment, their hopes hanging by a thread in the vast, unforgiving sea. Was the plane sabotaged? What could be inside the black box? Join us as we uncover the mysterious story behind the tragic fate of Flight 447, a calamity that leaves a permanent mark in history. Titanic, the fall of a modern aircraft. The story of Flight 447 is often compared to the sinking of the Titanic, but in the sky. It's about a plane that was so modern and safe, people never thought it could crash. Yet, on a stormy night in June 2009, that's exactly what happened to this Air France A330. It fell from the sky and sank into the Atlantic Ocean in just 4 minutes. For a long time, nobody knew what happened inside the plane while it was crashing. Now, we've learned from recordings what went wrong, showing how even the most modern planes can meet disaster quickly. On the evening of May 31, 2009, Air France Flight 447 was getting ready to go from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. Everything seemed fine on the plane. It was a top-notch aircraft with the latest technology, built by skilled engineers. It was supposed to be a routine flight by a top-tier airline. However, in an unexpected turn, the plane disappeared over the ocean. There were no goodbye messages. It was gone, just like that, leaving everyone baffled and saddened. 228 people lost their lives. The feeling of loss is overwhelming. Imagine not being able to see your daughter and her husband ever again. Recently, people found the plane's black box recordings. These recordings are very important because they help us understand what happened during the plane's last moments. They've helped solve a big mystery in the flying world and made people question our understanding of air safety. David Lee, a professional in air safety, commented, "This is a huge problem that the flying world needs to face and fix." The flight began at Rio de Janeiro Galeão International Airport at 7 p.m. local time. The flight, on an Airbus A330, was supposed to last 11 hours, all the way to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. Air France is known for its quality service. The Airbus A330 is a new type of plane known for needing very little help from pilots during long trips. Usually, pilots control the plane for about 3 minutes during takeoff, before letting the plane's systems take over, and then again during landing. This flight was expected to be just another example of how well modern aviation can work. But instead, it ended in a tragedy that would question our trust in modern flying technology. David Lee, an expert on how planes are kept safe, spent a lot of time looking into the terrible event involving Air France. He found something worrying. These days, flying relies more on computers than on human pilots. Airlines are telling their pilots, "You can't fly this plane better than the computer can, so don't even try." This means that if pilots are always told not to take control, and they never practice flying by themselves, they might start doubting if they can fly at all. What happens then? You end up having a huge flying bus full of 228 people from 32 different countries, but with no one who's confident enough to take control if things go wrong. Consider the story of Caroline Soulis and her husband Sebastian Vettel-Vati, who worked for Air France. They had just spent 3 wonderful days off together in Rio, a place they both loved since they met on a plane and got married 2 years later. Before they got on Flight 447, Caroline texted her mother, Corinne, saying how sad she was to leave the sunny weather of Brazil behind. It was a casual Sunday evening message, but it turned out to be her last, which made her mother remember that exact moment when she knew her daughter was on the plane. The plane started its journey perfectly, flying northwards. At 1:35 a.m., it left the area controlled by Brazilian air traffic and made its last call to them. This is where the mystery deepens. The plane moved into an area where radars can't track it, expected to reappear under Senegal's watchful eyes. But even if off radar, the crew wasn't out of touch. They could have sent messages through different ways, even talking to nearby planes to relay messages back to land. In the world where we can talk to someone across the globe instantly, it's shocking that a huge plane like Flight 447 could just vanish without a trace. 2.5 hours after it last spoke to Brazilian controllers, Flight 447 still hadn't made contact. It should have shown up on Dakar's radar screens by then. "It's really strange and troubling," said another flight safety expert. "We didn't hear a word from a plane that had every tool to reach out. It was as if it just stepped into a void." People started to wonder and worry. Was there still a chance? Or had the plane disappeared just like that, leaving everyone in disbelief? The initial shock was universal, but deep down, many felt a growing sense of dread that the plane was already lost. Now we see what happens next, showing the deep sadness of those who lost someone. The Air France heartache. At Charles de Gaulle Airport, the atmosphere was filled with anticipation as families and friends awaited their loved ones. They expected to see passengers from many flights walk through the arrival gates, but there was one flight, Air France Flight 447, that was missing from the list. It hadn't sent out any distress signals, it wasn't appearing on any radars, and nobody had seen where it went. The hours stretched long and heavy with an uneasy silence, until Air France had to deliver the terrible news. The plane, they said, couldn't possibly still be flying. It must have fallen, taking all 228 souls with it into an uncertain end. The news spread a wave of disbelief and sorrow. One family member recalls being at home, feeling a profound sense of isolation, convinced that life as they knew it had shattered completely. Meanwhile, Caroline's father, Robert, was in a different country for work. He wasn't with his family when the unimaginable news started to spread. Instead, a friend had to break the news to him, as his wife found herself unable to. The message was chilling. There had been an accident involving an Air France plane, and it seemed there were no survivors. The stark, brutal reality of the situation left him reeling, confronted with a loss so immense it was hard to comprehend. The clues about what happened to Flight 447 were scarce, leaving aviation authorities and devastated families grappling for answers. Without any signals of distress or clear indicators of what went wrong, they were left to speculate about terrifying possibilities. The lack of a distress call was particularly haunting. What could it mean? It led to wild theories and fears, including the suspicion of a terrorist attack. French officials and search teams faced a daunting task. They had to comb through vast expanses of ocean in search of any piece of wreckage that might give them answers. The widespread belief in the aviation community is that modern planes, with all their advanced engineering, don't just break apart mid-flight. There had to be a significant catastrophic event to bring down such a well-made aircraft. This line of reasoning led to the growing consensus that only the plane's wreckage could reveal the truth behind its tragic end. Was it a technical failure, human error, or something more sinister like a bomb that caused this disaster? The uncertainty only added to the pain and anxiety of those waiting for news. After searching non-stop for 5 days, search teams found parts of the broken plane and 50 people who were on it, far away in the sea near Brazil. This discovery showed there was no bomb involved, because the plane was still whole when it crashed into the water. However, this crash made people worry about the safety of the Airbus A330, a very modern type of plane that many airlines around the world use. People started to wonder if this plane had a big problem that no one knew about. The situation reminded some people of the famous ship, the Titanic, which sank after hitting an iceberg. But this plane and the Titanic are very different stories. The Titanic crashed for a clear reason, but this airplane seemed to be okay and then suddenly disappeared. Now, everyone wanted to find out why Flight 447 crashed, just like people once searched for the truth about the Titanic. But finding answers was tough because the plane's black boxes, which record what happens during the flight, were lost deep in the ocean. The government of France did not give up. They sent a special underwater submarine and tiny remote-controlled subs that can go very deep into the sea. Everyone, especially people who know a lot about flying safety like a man named Bill Voss, was watching this search. They knew that finding these black boxes was very important. These boxes held the clues to what happened to the plane. So, a huge effort began, with the French government leading and many others helping. The search was big and expensive, and it went on for a very long time, turning from weeks into months and then into years. Everyone hoped to find the black boxes to learn the truth and make flying safer for everyone else. But when everyone was starting to lose hope of ever figuring out what happened to Flight 447, the same American team that found the underwater remains of the Titanic was brought in to help. 2 years after the plane crashed, on April 2, 2011, they made a huge discovery deep in the ocean. They found the broken main part of the plane lying on the seabed, 13,000 feet down. Along with it, they found the very important black boxes that record what happens during the flight. An expert in plane crashes said this was a big moment. Finding these black boxes meant they could start to understand the plane's last moments much better. They also found 104 people from the flight still in their seats. It was a sad sight. But they couldn't find 74 others who were on the plane, including a woman named Caroline Sulis. One of her family members said that not finding her was like losing her all over again. It felt as if she had vanished many times over. Finding the black boxes was like unlocking a door to the past. They revealed what happened during the last 4 minutes of Flight 447. It was clear from the recordings that the 3 pilots knew they were in serious trouble. There was a lot of confusion and fear in the cockpit as they tried to control the plane. In those final moments early on June 1, 2009, the plane crashed into the South Atlantic Ocean. It had disappeared so suddenly, without any kind of signal for help. The details of how and why the 228 people on board died had been a huge puzzle in the world of flying. Now, they were finally starting to piece together the answers. Join us as we dig deeper into the stormy night, looking for clues to solve this mystery. The clues from the deep of Dubois' last moments. The only chance to understand what really happened lay in retrieving the flight's black boxes from deep under the sea. After spending more time and money than ever before on an underwater search, the black boxes from Flight 447 were finally pulled up from the ocean floor. Everyone was asking the same big question. How did a plane that was supposed to be one of the safest in the world just drop out of the sky? No one outside the investigation has heard the actual sounds from Flight 447's black boxes. However, by looking at what was written down from those sounds, we can put together the scary last moments before the plane crashed. Flight 447 left Rio de Janeiro and headed north, flying up the coast of Brazil towards Paris. The man in charge in the cockpit was Marc Dubois, 58 years old, with nearly 11,000 hours of flying time and lots of trips between Rio and Paris. The second in command was David Robert, 37 years old, who had flown for more than 6,500 hours. The third man, Pierre-Cedric Bonin, was the youngest at 32 and had just under 3,000 hours in the air. His wife was also on the plane. Bonin sat on the right side of the cockpit while Captain Dubois took the left. David Robert was taking a rest in a small room just behind the cockpit. They were doing their usual work, talking to the people who help planes stay on course. The night was calm, and in the middle of the Atlantic, there wasn't much happening. Back in the passenger area, people were trying to get some sleep. They had finished their meals, and the lights were dimmed for the long flight to Paris. Everyone was trying to relax and settle down for the night. Up front in the cockpit, things were also calm. An expert on flying safety mentioned that the plane was moving up and down a bit, but nothing too rough. It was clear to the pilots that they were heading towards big storm clouds, which is pretty normal for that part of the world. They knew they'd have to steer clear of them, just like pilots always do. As the plane gets closer to the equator, the weather starts getting really bad. This part of the world is famous for its huge storms that are too big for regular planes to fly over. A weather expert explains that pilots have to be really careful when they decide how to avoid these big storms. The weather forecasts showed lots of areas with thunderstorms, which are very dangerous for planes. Despite this, Captain Dubois doesn't seem too worried. He keeps the plane going straight ahead. Dealing with storm clouds usually isn't too hard. According to another expert, pilots just need to look at the clouds. If there's a big storm cloud in front, they can just turn a bit to the left or right to go around it. This should be easy. During the flight, there are bright lights on the windscreen known as St. Elmo's fire. This happens when ice particles hit the plane and create electricity. But even this doesn't seem to bother Captain Dubois much. He decides it's okay for him to take a break. He leaves the least experienced pilot, Bonin, in charge. This means Bonin will be the one flying the plane, not David Robert, who has just come back to the cockpit after resting. The weather becomes even scarier, and now the least experienced pilot is the one who has to deal with it. Just after 2 a.m., something loud happens in the cockpit, recorded by the black boxes. Experts think this sound was made by ice hitting the plane. Suddenly, an alarm goes off. It's telling them that the autopilot, the system that flies the plane without a person touching the controls, has stopped working. Now Bonin, sitting in the right seat, has to fly the plane by hand. David Robert, even though he's been flying for longer, becomes the assistant. Imagine this. It's 2 in the morning, it's very dark outside, and there's no moon. They can't see where the sky ends and the earth begins. Also, this is the time when people usually feel the sleepiest. And then, out of nowhere, there's this very loud alarm. The autopilot is off, and they have to take control of the plane. This is a lot for anyone to handle, especially when they're probably not feeling very awake. This crucial part shows us the key moments and wrong choices in the dark skies. The hidden ice leads to trouble. Neither pilot knew that the extremely cold weather outside had caused ice to form and block 3 very important sensors on the plane, which are called pitot tubes. These sensors help measure how fast the plane is going. Because the sensors were blocked, the plane's automatic flying system, or autopilot, stopped working for a little while. But this wasn't a huge problem. The plane was still flying straight and level. The pilots just needed to keep the plane flying smoothly and levelly. But something unexpected happened. For a reason that remains a mystery, Vernier, one of the pilots, pulled back sharply on his control stick. This is a bit like tilting a car's steering wheel sharply upwards for no reason. It simply wasn't necessary. It was as if he was suddenly startled and reacted by pulling back. Then, Bonilla, the other pilot, made a critical mistake. He made the plane climb very sharply, almost like a car suddenly going uphill at a steep angle. This single action put the plane in great danger. If he had just left the controls alone, nothing bad would have happened. In less than 60 seconds, the pitot tubes would have melted the ice by themselves, and the plane would have been fine. They just needed to keep flying as they were. However, because of the steep climb, the plane started to move upwards too quickly and began to lose speed, like a car that can't keep up its speed on a steep uphill road. The air up high is very thin, which makes it harder for the plane to keep going up. Because of this, the plane began to slow down significantly. It's very confusing, even for someone who flies planes, to understand why the pilots didn't notice the dangerous situation they were in. The situation worsened as the plane began to stall, meaning it was losing the ability to keep flying and starting to fall. This moment was critical and led to a very serious problem for Air France Flight 447. The pilot's actions and the ensuing confusion are things that puzzle and deeply upset those who know about flying, wondering how such a misunderstanding could occur. The vast Atlantic Ocean stretches 40,000 feet below as Flight 447 suddenly starts to plummet. Imagine this: a huge airplane begins to drop from the sky, no longer soaring, just falling straight down. This is what happened in the last minutes of Air France Flight 447. This Airbus A330, carrying 228 people, was high above the Atlantic when it unexpectedly began to dive towards the water at a frightening speed of 10,000 feet per minute. Strangely, there were no emergency calls sent out, and there was nothing physically wrong with the plane itself. It was still capable of flying, yet it was not flying anymore. The recordings from the plane's black box, a device that records flight data, showed the pilots desperately trying to regain control of the plane during these critical final moments. On the outside of Air France 447, one of the speed sensors, which are crucial for measuring how fast the plane is moving through the air, got blocked because of ice. This ice caused the plane's autopilot system, which automatically flies the plane, to turn off. Pierre-Cédric Bonilla, the pilot who took over manual control, was the least experienced in the cockpit. He mistakenly made the plane climb too sharply upwards. This steep climb was so severe that the plane started to stall. In aviation, stalling refers to when a plane goes too slowly for its wings to keep it in the air, causing the plane to start falling. Bernie, another pilot, had to react fast to prevent the plane from continuing to fall. However, just as one of the blocked speed sensors started working again, giving them accurate speed readings, the pilots faced another issue. They didn't trust the new information showing up on their instruments. The situation was chaotic. Bill Voss, an expert in flight safety, explains how this turned from a simple problem into a nightmare. At first, the issue was manageable, but then it spiraled out of control. The The pilots were suddenly receiving correct data from their instruments, but because everything else had been so confusing up until then, they doubted this new information. This distrust led to an even bigger mix-up. David Lee, a person who looks into how to keep things safe, studied the last few minutes of Flight 447 and the serious choices the people flying the plane made. He found out that when the pilots finally paid attention and saw their plane was flying too slow and its nose was pointed too high up, they were confused. They didn't know how their actions had led to this situation. Even more, they stayed confused and didn't figure out what was really happening during the remaining time of the flight. They just couldn't understand the mess they were in. The second pilot, Robert, tried to get the main pilot, Captain Dubois, back from his break to help out in the pilot's area because things were not going well. Captain Dubois didn't answer at first. During this time, Air France 447 climbed really high, up to nearly 40,000 feet above the ocean, and then it began to fall. A minute after Robert called him, Captain Dubois finally came back. But by the time he got there, the situation had gotten really bad. The plane had stopped going up and started to fall. It was not moving forward much, but falling straight down really fast. Now, the big plane, an Airbus A330, was dropping fast toward the water, falling 10,000 feet every minute. It was a very dark night without moonlight, so the pilots couldn't see the ocean or ground below. They didn't realize they were only 3 minutes away from crashing into the sea. They didn't think there was a chance to fix the problem because they wrongly believed the plane was going too fast, even though there was still a chance to stop the plane from stalling and falling. In our next part, we face the scary last minutes and the big questions still left unanswered. The tragic end of a flight. Usually, when you're sitting in a plane, you hear a certain sound from the outside. This sound comes from the air moving quickly past the plane as it flies. But this time, the sound was very different. It wasn't the normal, somewhat comforting sound of flying. No, this sound was much louder and scarier. It was not what the pilots or passengers were used to hearing. The pilots, the people in charge of flying the plane, thought this loud noise meant that the plane was flying too fast, like a car speeding on a highway. But they were completely wrong. In fact, the plane was moving too slowly. It wasn't speeding at all. This situation was very confusing and frightening for the pilots. They were expected to understand and fix the problem, but instead, they were panicking. Panic is when you're so scared and confused that you can't think clearly or make good decisions. Now, let's talk about what needed to be done to fix the problem. The plane was in a stall, which means it was falling because it wasn't moving forward fast enough to stay in the air. To stop the stall and make the plane fly properly again, the pilots needed to point the nose of the plane down towards the ground. This might sound scary, but it's actually how you get the plane to start moving forward fast enough to fly right. But there was a big problem. One of the pilots, Bonilla, was doing the exact opposite of what was needed. He was pulling back on the control stick, which makes the nose of the plane point up, not down. This was making the situation much worse, but the other pilots couldn't see what he was doing wrong because of where they were sitting. They all needed to work together to push the stick forward, to bring the nose down, but they weren't coordinating. It's important to note that there was technically nothing mechanically wrong with the plane. The issues were coming from the decisions being made inside the cockpit. During this time, the plane's stall warning, an alarm that tells pilots that the plane is not flying correctly, sounded 58 times. That's a lot of warnings, but after a while, the alarm stopped. The plane was now in such an unusual and bad flying condition that the computer system, which usually helps the pilots understand what's going on, couldn't recognize the situation anymore. It was beyond what the computer was programmed to handle. At this critical moment, everyone on board Air France 447, including the pilots and passengers, was in grave danger. There was very little time left. The plane was only 10,000 feet above the sea, which might sound high, but in airplane terms, it's very, very close to disaster. This height is also known as Flight Level 100. It was a critical point. Before reaching this height, there might have been a small chance to fix everything and make the plane safe again. But after reaching this point, that chance was almost gone. It was a transition from a moment where there might have been some hope to a moment where hope was quickly disappearing. Everyone on the plane was facing a very dangerous situation that they might not escape from. What could the passengers have felt during those moments? I really hope most of them were sleeping since it was 2 in the morning, but it's likely that many were awake. And for those who were asleep, the strange and scary sounds might have woken them up. Imagine being woken up in the middle of the night to a noise you've never heard before. The plane would have been shaking and moving in a way that's not normal. This would have been very scary. They would have felt something was very wrong. It's hard to think about what was going through their minds. It's a very sad thought, and honestly, it's hard to imagine exactly how they felt. Now, let's talk about what happened in the cockpit. Captain Dubois finally understood what the problem was. He realized that Bonilla had been pulling the control stick the wrong way. This was making the plane's nose point up too much, which caused the plane to stall. They were trying to fix it, but it was very late. They were running out of time. The plane was very close to the sea, only 2,000 feet above it. An alarm went off to warn them that the ground, or in this case, the ocean, was dangerously close. At this point, all 3 pilots knew the situation was really bad. They could see they were almost at the sea level with no way to climb back up. In the last few moments, it seems like they just couldn't do anything more. The recording from the cockpit stopped at 14 minutes and 28 seconds past 2 a.m. Now, let's remember 2 passengers, Sebastian Villavati and Caroline Soulis. They met on a flight to San Francisco in 2003. 6 years later, they were on Air France A330. Sebastian's body was found after the crash, but Caroline's was not. They were together, a couple, and now they are apart forever. It's a heartbreaking story. I hope in those final moments she did not feel anything scary or painful. I really hope for that. But no one can be sure. It's a very sad and tragic ending. After the crash, you feel very lonely. It's hard to understand and accept that your daughter and her son-in-law are gone forever. When we talk about airplane crashes, sometimes it seems like it's the pilot's fault. However, a lot of experts think the real problem is not just the people flying the plane. They say the bigger issue is with the whole flying industry. This industry tells pilots to trust the plane's automatic systems a lot. So much that pilots forget how to fly manually. If these pilots couldn't handle an emergency, it's not just a mistake by one person. It's a mistake by the whole system. Some people might want to blame just the pilots, but that's not seeing the big picture. We're dealing with a problem that affects the entire airline industry. The truth is, the industry has a big problem because it's not teaching pilots to fly without depending on computers all the time, and nothing is being done to fix this. If we don't look at the whole situation and only blame the pilots, we're missing what's really wrong. This problem is not just about one flight. It's about how all pilots are trained and how the industry works. If we don't change things, this kind of tragic accident could happen again. It could happen again, and that's something we need to prevent. Has the mystery of Flight 447 brought us any closer to understanding the unpredictable nature of the skies? Or does it remind us of the fragile balance between human innovation and nature's might? Share your thoughts, and remember to hit like and subscribe for more.